dad Julian has been talking about land value taxation for as long as I can remember. But I think with his friends Jonty and Gareth, he's come up with an idea that can put some of the theory into practice. So, Julian, tell me about voluntary ground rent. What's it all about?
I believe that the economy and society would work much better if everybody who owned land were to pay a contribution, a rent really, to their local community for occupying that land. So I think that ownership of land should be a secure use right that you can't be dislodged from. But I also think that it should be bounded by duties and responsibilities. The responsibility that I think that landowners should have is quite a formal agreement to care for the land that they have, and that this should be enshrined in the same way that agricultural tenancies are enshrined in husbandry agreements, enshrined an agreement for each property about how it's looked after and how it's used. And the duty that I think that landowners should have is to the people who live in society with them, to pay them, pay that community the market rent of their land as a way of contributing to that society. And one of the things that really encourages me at the moment is that over the last few years this has really entered mainstream thinking and is gaining additional political traction all the time. So I can see that the idea of people making contributions which are based on the value of the land that they make use of and exclude other people from will eventually become the way that we organise and finance our society. But it's a slow old business. I've been thinking and writing about this for the whole of my life. And one day Jonty came into the pub and he said, we've been talking about this for a long time, and I've decided I'm just going to do it.
Jonty, what about you? Why are you making voluntary ground rent contributions?
The contribution is to the community. It's a community contribution. The voluntary ground rent bit is a way of measuring the contribution to the community that is due to me, and it comes from a realisation that the existing tax system, the system that funds public services, is cracking at the seams, is breaking down. It's not able to deliver the social care, the community care that we have. And as it cracks and dissipates, then it feels right that a new voluntary system can grow into its place. So measuring a voluntary ground rent, measuring my contribution to the community by measuring the ground rent that is due to me for the use of the land that I have the title to, seems like a system that is right in terms of it's right because it distinguishes between what is my property, what is properly my property, which is the stuff that is made by human hands, that either I've purchased from other human hands that have made it, or made it myself, or my family's made it, and the other side of property, which is the stuff of the world that is not made by any of us. And that includes the land, it includes the air that we breathe, it includes the water that nourishes us. It includes the ecology of the global ecology that we're part of. And if I use a part of that type of property, the property of the globe as a whole, for my exclusive use, then I become a tenant that has custodial duties to the wider community, and that can be measured, and that's what's exciting about having it as a ground rent, is that my duty as the dues that I'm responsible, I feel responsible to pay, are now measurable, and I can make that payment in a voluntary way. And as I do it, it can encourage others to do it, and it can it seems to me to have the exciting possibility of growing a replacement economy that has rules that encourage the stewardship, the looking after the world, which, if we don't start having an economy that is aligned with looking after the world, as we are at the moment, we're in trouble.
What does voluntary ground rent mean in practice?
Okay, so if we take ground rent first, what we mean by it is the market rental value of the land, not buildings, but the land itself, as if it were being paid to a private landlord. For the voluntary ground rent project, we're talking about a tiny proportion of that, maybe a little bigger than tiny, but nowhere near the full market rental value. The idea of it is that it's being paid, people are choosing to pay it in recognition of the fact that the value of the land is created by all of us jointly. Where it goes is another question entirely, but the main point is that it's paid in recognition of our exclusive use of the land.
So Gareth, that means as a homeowner, I would contribute an amount to my community on an ongoing basis, and that amount would reflect a proportion of the rental value of the land on which my house sits.
Exactly that.
So why are you doing this?
Good question. The full answer might take a long time to explain. This is one of the best explanations I've seen for it by Henry George. But what I can do is to take you around the block and give you a rough idea. So first of all, none of us made the land. It exists. It existed before us. It'll exist long after us. Second, the value of the land comes from the activities of all of us jointly. Third, none of us can exist without it. It's as essential to us as air and water, and our food comes from it too. If there were sufficient land available, George's theory says that it would make a big impact on employment opportunities, wages, working conditions, etc. George's theory also says that the most efficient way of having sufficient land available for all of us to use for our own needs would be that everybody pays the full market rental value of land. And having gone the full circle, that kind of makes sense given that none of us created it and that all of us jointly create the value along with nature that we attribute to it.
And Julian, do you think anyone would want to join you?
Well, I'm quietly encouraged about that, really. I was really interested to see last year that Westminster City Council have asked the owners of their most expensive properties, the Band H properties in council tax, to make a voluntary contribution of £833 a year to fund youth services, services for homeless people and services for older people. So 2% of the people asked to make these voluntary contributions have responded positively. I think that's frankly amazing. So I'm very encouraged by people's willingness to do this. I would like to see some linkage, more explicit linkage between what people are paying and the market rent of the land which they're receiving and which the rest of society allow them to have. But I'm very encouraged by that. And we have contacts with other groups like the Quakers, some of whom feel that at this particular time we should all be paying a bit more tax.
And where do you hope it might lead?
Well, I would obviously love to see everybody paying a ground rent to the community. I think that realistically, in order to achieve that, that means some sort of top-down government intervention. And so what I hope this will do is to stimulate the debate amongst people, amongst thinkers, amongst politicians about the advisability of introducing a land value tax and replacing our existing system of taxation, which is inefficient and unfair.
Where do you think it might lead?
Where do I hope it might lead? Well, I hope it might. I really have big hopes. I think it might lead to a whole new way of dealing with our economy, dealing with our nurturing of communities, dealing with our whole way of looking at the Earth's resources. And if we can think of it, begin to start thinking of our use of portions of the Earth, we can have proper entitlement to use a portion of the Earth with boundaries around it that are maintained not by enforcement, which at the moment our economy is ultimately maintained by physical enforcement, by the right of the state to use violence between states and within populations, but by a voluntary agreement across the boundaries, which then become hospitable boundaries. You have a relationship with those who you're excluding, which is a proper and dignified relationship by paying the value of the use of the place that you have.
And where do you hope it might lead, Gareth?
Well, I'm in agreement with Julian that in the long run it's only really going to have the impact that we'd like it to have if it's paid comprehensively by all. However, where we differ is on how we get to that place. I am hopeful, confident that a combination of voluntary actions, people seeing, people doing like what's going on here, living the change you want to see in the world, with the evolving decentralized technologies that could enable us to have the mechanisms of collecting and distributing land rents. I think that could transition from where we are today to a world in which everybody pays full rent without anybody having been compelled to do anything.
This is a really interesting idea, and I think it might appeal to quite a lot of people. It feels to me connected to one of the major issues of our time, which is the huge inequality, intergenerational inequality, caused by hugely increasing house prices. Thank you, guys.